So after the most recent ban list, Altergeist players were really scrambling to find new tech choices to make up for the lost copies of Multifaker. This is a perfectly reasonable reaction, because if you're a fan of the Altergeist deck, you probably want to continue playing it even though Multifaker went to 1 copy per deck. And I know for me personally, I tried out a ton of different cards, but over the past couple weeks especially, I've been sent a bunch of Altergeist deck lists and card suggestions, and in today's video I wanted to address the 5 most common questionable tech choices that I've been sent over the most recent format. And what makes these cards so interesting is that I don't think any of them are glaringly terrible. These cards are actually pretty good in some certain scenarios, but overall when we're building a deck like Altergeist, we want all the cards to have maximum impact, and I think right now these cards just don't fall under that category. One of the things that you'll notice as we go through here is that many of the cards require you to already have good hands to make them useful, and that's not really something we're looking for out of a deck like Altergeist. When a deck like Altergeist gets to actually play the game and draw playable hands, it'll probably win most of the situations. So adding cards to your deck that are only good when you already open decent isn't really a good deck building decision for a longer tournament. If you're opening decent enough for these cards to work, you probably will be able to win those games without them, and these cards will just do nothing to help you in your brick hands, which is really what we're trying to avoid when we play Altergeist. The first card that I want to talk about is from a Rising Rampage. It was a secret rare, and I actually own 2 copies of this card. I pulled one out of a box and one out of a sneak peek, if I remember correctly, and this is a level 8 monster, Witchcrafter Golem Aruru. It's a light monster, 2800 attack, 0 defense spellcaster, and it says when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a spellcaster monster or monsters you control, or targets it for an attack, as a quick effect you can target 1 card your opponent controls or 1 Witchcrafter spell in your graveyard, special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, return a targeted card to the hand. You can only use this effect once per turn, and then once per turn during your opponent's standby phase, return this card to the hand. So in theory, what you're doing with this card is that if your opponent uses a targeting effect on one of your Altergeist monsters, you can then summon this from the hand and bounce the monster back to their hand. So is that good? Well, in some cases, yes, but I think one thing that a lot of players have missed when you're looking at this card is that this doesn't actually negate the effect. It just bounces the opponent's card back to their hand. So like if your opponent summoned like Nightmare Cerberus and targeted your Silk, and then you summon this thing, your Silk would still be destroyed. This doesn't prevent the destruction or doesn't prevent the effect. And while blocking attacks is kind of neat, you already have an in-archetype card, Concrete, that does that almost quite as well as this card does. But most importantly, I mean, the thing that a lot of people have missed, and a lot of times when I get suggested cards to play in Altergeist, one thing that I feel like a lot of people forget about, and I don't really know why, is that when you summon Altergeist Multifaker and use the effect to special summon an Altergeist from deck, you are locked down to only special summoning Altergeist monsters for the entire turn. That means that during the turn that you summon Multifaker and use that effect, which should be almost every single turn, you cannot summon this Witchcrafter Golem Aruru, and that means that basically this card is just going to sit in your hand almost every single turn. That means this card is only good when you don't have Multifaker, and if you don't have Multifaker, you're probably not winning even with this card as an extra layer of interruption. Skill Drain admittedly has appeared in some top cut lists. It never became like a staple in Altergeist decks, but it has seen some experimentation, probably more experimentation than any other card we're going to talk about. This is a continuous trap card if you don't know that already, and it says activate by paying 1,000 life points. The effects of all face-up monsters on the field are negated while those monsters are face-up on the field, but their effects can still be activated. So you might be asking yourself, well, why are people playing this in Altergeist? Don't you have lots of effects that you want to use? And the answer is yes, but while you have Skill Drain and Altergeist Protocol on the field, your Altergeist activated effects aren't negated because of the protocol. Where this messes up though, and the main reason people don't play this card, is that your effects that don't activate aren't protected by the protocol. So for example, one of the biggest effects in an Altergeist deck is the ability for Mulaseek to attack directly while your opponent has monsters on the field, and even if you have protocol and the Skill Drain up, you can't do that because it's not an activated effect. This is definitely a huge issue, but I think overall one of the bigger issues with Skill Drain is that if you don't have the protocol on the field, this card actually does really screw you up. What this means, for example, is that if you had 3 back row, one of which was protocol, one of which was Skill Drain, and you flip the protocol, you summon Multifaker, you flip Skill Drain, if your opponent then used Twin Twisters and hit the protocol and then your other face down, now you're stuck with this Skill Drain. Now you can't use any monster effects, and that's not good, because once this card is face up on the field, you don't really have a lot of good ways to get to the second copy or the whatever how many copies of protocol you're playing, because you can't use the Marionetter to set it because you have the Skill Drain face up. Putting a card like this in your deck could steal you some wins. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, when you have Skill Drain and the protocol and your opponent has no back or removal, you're probably going to win those. But I think in most cases, if you have protocol and a trap card, another trap card, and you have the multi-faker, it doesn't really need to be skill drained to win those games. I think in most cases, when you have that many sort of interruptions, you're probably winning those anyway. This is sort of a win more card that's only good when you already have a setup with the protocol and the Marionetter and what have you. And I think in general, for consistency's sake, you really just can't play a card like this in a deck like Altergeists, especially considering that once it actually does sort of resolve and you get the setup with the protocol, if your opponent has one form of back row removal, you're really screwed. Next up, let's talk about the one that by far is the most suggested card out of this entire video for right now, and that is Dark Renewal. So this is a trap card. This is a card that I actually considered playing quite a while ago, like 6 months ago in Altergeists, and then I never ended up doing that, but I'll talk about why. So this thing says, when your opponent normal or special summons a monster or monsters, target one of those monsters and one spellcaster monster you control, send both monsters to the graveyard, then you can special summon one dark spellcaster type monster from your deck or graveyard. Obviously the target for this is multi-faker. So a lot of people, like so many people, have suggested that I play this card, especially when I talked about my last deck profile, like, oh, I'm struggling to find the 40th card. A lot of people just said, well, just play Dark Renewal. It's like an extra copy of multi-faker. And while I see where they're coming from as far as surface level analysis goes, because this thing does summon multi-faker, this card is just not good for a longer tournament. So I know if you open this card and Mullseek or Marionetter going first, it's a pretty good way to get to that multi-faker. But if you open the Mullseek in this card, you already had a way to the multi-faker, so it doesn't really matter. But yes, if you open Marionetter and this card, it's pretty decent. It's a pretty good way to summon the multi-faker, but there are many problems with this card. First off, if you already have a multi-faker or a way to get to it with spoofing or Mullseek, this card is basically just a dead trap because you'll never really need to activate it, and that's definitely a huge issue. You want all of your traps to be live as many times as possible. But the biggest issue with this card that I just can't seem to wrap my head around, that a lot of people keep suggesting it, is that this card is basically useless going second. When you're building a trap-based deck, I just talked about this in a couple videos ago about trap cards and rogue decks, you need to have cards that are useful going first or second, especially when you're playing so many slower trap cards like in an Altergeist deck, in a Guru control deck. You need to have as many live cards as possible for when you lose the die roll, because you're not going to win all of them, and this card going second is just completely useless. It'll never go off, and even if it does go off, it won't be nearly as impactful because your opponent will already have a board. Yes, this card going first is very good, but once again, it is a win more card, and also if you don't open a monster card, which is the hands you're trying to avoid, this card is literally unplayable because you need to have a spellcaster type monster that you already control to even activate it in the first place. This is just a not good card to play in Altergeist. The types of people that are suggesting a card like Dark Renewal aren't necessarily wrong, but they're only thinking about cards like this when it's the optimal situation, but it's not always the optimal situation in Yu-Gi-Oh! You'll face decks when you go second and you have to break their board. You have to have trap cards that can answer their already on the field cards. This just doesn't do that, and this card is useless if you don't have any monster cards, which is already a huge issue for Altergeist. Yes, this card looks good when it actually goes off, but more often than not, this card will either be win more or just not playable, and that is not a good thing to have when you're trying to build a competitive deck. The next card that I want to talk about is one that really isn't being suggested too much anymore ever since Extravagance came out, but I think people still talk about it, maybe as a budget replacement for Extravagance or whatever, and that is Spellbook of Knowledge. And this card isn't nearly as good once you read it a second time. I actually considered playing this card until I realized that I was reading it wrong. So what does this thing say? Well, it says, send to the graveyard either one spellcaster monster you control or one spellbook card in your hand or face up on your field except Spellbook of Knowledge, and if you do, draw 2 cards, then it's a hard once return effect. So when did I consider playing this card? Well, I considered playing this card when I played Droll and Lockbird in my Altergeist deck, because I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, if you go first and you open Droll, you can discard it with Spellbook of Knowledge. That's not how it works. This card has to send a spellcaster monster you control to the graveyard to get 2 draws. And while in some cases, once again, if you open the Mullseek and the Spellbook of Knowledge, that's pretty good, just like in the case of Dark Renewal. Once again, it's only good going first and only good if you already open one of the best cards in the deck, probably the best card to start with, Mullseek, and that's not good because if you open Mullseek, your hand is already good. This is a win more card, and in the case of opening Marionetter, not Mullseek, this card is actually significantly worse than even something like Dark Renewal because you don't even guarantee that you get to that Altergeist card. Actually, in some cases, you'll like send the Marionetter to the graveyard, draw 2 cards, and now you don't have the multi-faker, but you also don't have an Altergeist on field for the protocol that you just set, so it creates a very unfortunate situation. I think this card is just sort of flashy when it goes off and it's pretty cool, and if it discarded spellcasters from the hand, I would consider it in formats where you're playing Droll and Lockbird just to get those out of your hand in bad matchups, but overall it's just not consistent enough for a competitive deck right now. And I think even if you are on a budget, this isn't a good replacement for Extravagance. I'd much rather play like 3 copies of Duality and multiple copies of Sanguine before I'd play this card, because at least those cards are going to consistently go off and get you to the cards that you need. The final card is Silent Magician, and admittedly this is a card that I really wanted to work because I love this card in Duel Links and I wanted to play it in the TCG in Altergeist, my favorite deck, but I wasn't able to because it just doesn't go off as consistently as you would want it to. So this is a level 4 monster. I know some Duel Links players probably know what this card does, but this card basically has never been played in the TCG. The main portion that you need to know about this card is that you tribute a spellcaster monster to special summon this from your hand, and then it can negate 1 spell card during either player's turn. It also gains 500 attack for every card in your hand, so that's pretty cool. This card was very strong in the Spellbook deck in Duel Links. I had a ton of fun with it really, but in Altergeist not so much. And the main reason is sort of the same reason with Knowledge and Dark Renewal and all these cards. This thing is only good if you open really good hands already. It's not very good to tribute Marionetter. It's okay to tribute the Moleseek and then get the Multifaker to your hand, but once again, one of the biggest reasons this card was good in Duel Links wasn't so much its on-field effect, but the fact that once it died, it floated into Silent Magician level 8. However, just like I mentioned with the Witchcrafter card, this card can't float into level 8 if you've used Multifaker that turn, which means in most cases, you're not actually going to be able to do that. So then it's like, well, then you just play this card without level 8 in your deck. Well, in that case, because Altergeists usually don't end with that many cards in their hand, your opponent can just run this over. This card is just not nearly as oppressive in the TCG where there's so many other negation cards versus Duel Links where there really weren't those types of cards available. If you guys remember, I did a pretty similar video to this about FAs like a while ago, talking about some tech options that people were playing I didn't think were very good, and I like doing this because I get sent a lot of deck lists for decks I'm currently playing, like Altergeists, like FAs back in the day, and I just wanted a place to answer all these questions without individually replying to all of you, because I'm just one person. I don't have like a team of social media people that can answer your questions, and I know a lot of these cards were getting asked multiple times by different people, so I thought it would be important to make a video answering those questions. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.